go get our gear around and grab quickly saws in case we gotta cut things out. We're grabbing everything that we think of this rescue operation and would let us go out. They were sending the Rangers. The decision was made by our CEO. At that time, I wanted to stick my fist in his face. I was like,
in a chilling and morbid tragedy, Extortion 17 became the deadliest single incident for U.S. forces in the Afghan war. On August 6, 2011, a Chinook helicopter was shot down by Taliban insurgents. All 13 people aboard, including 22 Navy SEALs. This horrifying loss of life included members of the Elite SEAL Team 6, the same unit involved in the Osama bin Laden raid just months prior. The eerie downfall of Extortion 17 shocked the nation, marking a dark day for U.S. Special Forces and highlighting the extreme dangers they face. In a chilling and morbid tragedy, Extortion 17.
Admiral Cabo once conducted in December 1969.
On the night of August 6, 2011, the U.S. military helicopter with the call sign Extortion 17, carrying a quick reaction force of 38 men, was on its way to the border province in Afghanistan. Their mission was to reinforce the Joint Special Operations Command Unit of the 75th Rangers, who were in combat with enemy insurgents. Extortion 17 never landed its destination, and the tragic event claimed the lives of everybody on board, including 17 Navy SEAls. This event was a huge shock to all military personnel and would bear many questions about the tactics and strategic planning of the mission. This story seems to be shrouded in mystery and controversy. But to fully understand the significance of this event, we must first delve into the details on the war of Afghanistan and the US military's goals. After the September the 11th attacks on the World Trade Center in the Pentagon, the United States launched the global war of terror against Al-Qaeda and its allies.
on September the 11th, enemies of freedom committed an act of war against our country. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
In 2002, the US invaded Afghanistan, where Al-Qaeda was based and toppled the Taliban regime that had been outbreaking group. The war on terror also included military operations in Iraq, as well as a wide range of diplomatic, economic, and legal efforts to combat terrorism around the world. The war in Afghanistan had been long and difficult. US forces have been facing a ruthless and determined enemy. Over the years, American soldiers have fought hard to raise the loyalty of the country. For many years, it seemed that there was no end in South in this war, and this would become the longest war in modern day history. Now, let's discuss Extortion 17. On the night of August 5th, 2011, at 22:37 p.m. local time, a group of 47 US Army Rangers were deployed from the forward Marine base in Logar province to the Tangi Valley in Afghanistan to capture or kill a high-ranking Taliban commander who was Qara Tihi. The mission involved 2 transport helicopters and was supported by 2 OH-64 Apache helicopters, an in-support gunship, and other intelligence and surveillance aircraft. Whilst the Rangers were approaching the target compound at 11 p.m. local time, intelligence observed a group of people leaving the compound in low size. The Rangers would engage in different fighters. At 11:30 p.m., one of the Apache support helicopters engaged in a group skirmish with a different group of 8 Taliban fighters 400 meters north of the compound. They would end up killing 6 of them. ISR surveillance aircraft kept watch on the insurgent group that might have been attacked in the compound. The group, which began with just 2 people, eventually grew to 9. The commanders of the Special Operations Task Force and the Immediate Reaction Force suspected that Tahir may be among the group. As a result, they chose to use SEAL reserves to engage the group at about 1 in the morning. Almost an hour later, the aviation brigade came here to recruit the landing zone for Extortion 17, which would provide the ground for the infiltration of the facility. The landing zone had been examined for a previous mission they had by a big boost. The commanders then decided to add more troops to the mission, bringing the team size to 33 people, which included 17 Navy SEALs, members from other US military units, 7 members from the Afghan National Security Forces, and 1 Afghan interpreter. To quickly unload all of the troops at the destination, all of the soldiers were loaded onto 1 CH-47D Chinook helicopter, while the other Chinook helicopter would serve as a decoy. The 2 helicopters left the base at around 23 feet. Whilst the commanders were briefing the crew of Extortion 17, back in the Wardak province, 3 Taliban fighters took up a position in the grove of trees, while the remaining 6 or 7 headed to the building about 2 kilometers away from the target compound. Going forward, the 2 surveillance or fire support to the inbound Chinook which was carrying the SEALs. As Extortion 17 approached the landing zone, the SEALs and other units on board prepared for their mission. They checked their weapons and gear one last time, mentally preparing for the tasks ahead. But little did they know the disaster was about to strike. The Chinook descended low and air its wings being unloaded with the deadly warning. At 2:38 a.m., the Chinook was descending onto the landing zone. The Taliban fighters who had not yet been detected opened fire on the helicopter. The militants were approximately 220 meters away. The group would fire multiple RPG rounds from a two-story building. The second round would strike one of the helicopter's rotorblades, causing an instant loss in control for the pilots. 30 seconds later, one of the Apache helicopters was providing support with radio crashing. Six minutes after securing the compound, the Rangers detained several people and then set out on foot towards the crash site. They arrived at the crash site at 4:12 in the morning and discovered that there were no survivors. By 4:21 p.m., all of the remains had been removed from the crash site via a ground convoy and transported to the combat outpost in Saidabad. The process of recovering wreckage from the crash site continued until the 9th of August. 4 years after the downfall of Extortion 17, there were many theories about the possibility of a government cover-up. The official statement from U.S. Central Command claimed that the Taliban fighter fired a rocket-propelled grenade and scored a landing shot. It was reported that the Taliban fighters had no prior knowledge of the helicopter's flight path and that they had simply been in the right place at the right time. The Department of Defense official claimed that there were no police from the Afghans. However, some people, including the families of those involved, and other
But without these vehicles, if something would happen, there's pretty much no way to turn around. You'd have to back up all the way out of there. It's a very intense situation. That dismounts on the ground the whole time on that road. And they ended up finding, I think it looks like 28 IEDs that were strung through the trees to try to keep us from getting out there. Our mission was to clear the road for other units to come out and
Extortion 17 happened, which again is the biggest loss in still history of the city. With my wife's sitting from Kazan, and I had the exact same time. They called me brother. They said Afghanistan, you will get the person out of because like I was reading at hours, I get that movie, they're just going to people find boys in the front of the then I gone in and seen today, and it's same thing with me. The woods, fresh down to it. That was a super piece of it. Got amazing. She did the world's best, and the back was school. That was sure it was 30
Entire extortion happened. Oh man. And we were supposed to go out that night, so we were in J-Badge and all of that. And they were, I can't remember where they were, but they were, we had the birds or some of like our 160 guys, we had leather or something, they couldn't fly, so we didn't go. So they couldn't get on boats and use National Guards to go to their and I remember being in my, the deployment, you got your individual rooms and you have like a common area where, the comms.
but without these vehicles, if something would happen,
What is that? Right now, currently it's 1 minute down, outbound. Roger, we have a fallen angel. Call this traffic. Anybody out there? We have a fallen angel. Extortion is down. We're searching for survivors. We're searching. I don't think anybody made it.
Yeah, it's hard to be emotional on this stuff. One of the first questions that somebody asked me, I have no idea who it was. And they came up to me in like a very matter-of-fact way. They're like, hey, you just need the list. You need to figure out who you're going to go notify. 48 hours of that, my mom passed away. As organized as a tier 1 unit could be about handling the situation, it was chaos. Extortion 17 was very unique for me because of the fact that I was supposed to be on that deployment and I was supposed to be over there with our crew. Now we were in different teams and that, I was troop 1 and I was troop 2. So wherever we would have been, we would have been apart. What I would have been. I stayed home because my mother had just found out she had cancer.
Flying low over the Afghan treetops, an elite unit of special operators from 3 different American military branches and the Afghan army huddle together tightly inside their helicopter. The mood is tense, the night is dark. Each man prepares for the dangerous mission in his own way. Some tell lighthearted jokes or make small talk. Others focus intently on what's to come, constantly rehearsing his own role in the matter, while the rest is simply sitting in silence, contemplating what tomorrow will hold as the days tick down until they rotate home. They've been waiting for hours at this point, until the call finally comes over the radio to go into action. American forces on the ground have radioed for assistance, and it's their job to help accomplish the mission. As they cut their way through the humid Afghan night, they can see their landing zone barely visible over the treetops. The massive helicopter they're in starts to slow and make its descent. "One mic out," roars the pilot over the radio. The men start to stand and brace themselves for the mad dash they're going to have to make once the helicopter touches the ground. They're checking magazines and weapon conditions while tightening the helmet straps they loosened for the ride over. Then, disaster strikes. With no sound, no warning, the aircraft bursts into flames. There's a tremendous explosion. Within 5 seconds, 31 American and 7 Afghan lives are lost. But what exactly happened to Extortion 17 to cause it to go down in a ball of fire that caused one of the largest single-day losses of life in 21st century American military history? Qari Tahir, Taliban commander and linchpin of the Taliban resistance, needed to go down. Either arrest or termination. The man was too dangerous to be left alive. To get its man, the U.S. military turned to a mix of Navy SEALs, Air Force pararescuemen, explosive ordnance disposal, U.S. Army Rangers, and Afghan commandos. Tahir was in charge of all Taliban forces in the Kanki Valley of the Wardak province. This was a strategic area since it was only 60 miles from the Afghan capital of Kabul, where Taliban fighters had been launching deadly attacks. In the heart of the country, with near impunity for years, American and coalition forces had tried repeatedly to control this region, but it remained effectively a Taliban stronghold. After multiple operations to subdue the region with little success, American commanders were ecstatic when they received reliable intelligence that Tahir was going to be located at a compound with a lighter-than-usual bodyguard. This presented the perfect opportunity to not only cut the head off the snake of the local Taliban, but it would enable the coalition to gain valuable insight into how the Taliban were so successfully able to elude their best efforts to contain them. American officers knew from the beginning the mission was going to be high risk. The compound where the supposed meeting was taking place with Tahir was in a terrorist hotbed with little to no support from locals. Making matters worse, the natural geography of the valley presented only one way in and one way out, an easy kill zone for enemy defenders. Compounding these difficulties was that there was almost zero illumination that night, meaning the pilots and crew would have extreme difficulty seeing any incoming fire and have less time to react than usual. Lastly, if that were not enough, Taliban fighters had started to become much more active at night in response to the increased use of night raids by special forces in the area. In short, American forces were going up against a well-entrenched, battle-hardened, and experienced enemy who had geography and the cover of darkness on his side. Definitely not the most ideal of circumstances. American commanders wanted to keep the element of surprise, but were prepared to engage whatever enemy forces they might find. The plan of attack was to insert a platoon of Army Rangers by the compound, who would then sweep in and capture Tahir while he was in the building. The Navy SEALs and their accompanying support personnel would be on standby at the forward operating base they were based out of. This force was intended to be the reserve force in case the Rangers did not succeed or needed help before the target could get away. 2 Apache attack helicopters, an AC-130 gunship, and multiple intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft were tasked with providing support to the mission. At approximately 22:58 local time, the Ranger platoon was inserted into the objective. At about the same time, friendly aircraft noticed a group of 8 Taliban fighters walking in a single file line north of the compound. One of the Apache gunships opened fire and killed 6 of them, while the other 2 were sent fleeing into the night for their lives. Over the next several hours, the Rangers battled to control the compound. By about 2:45 in the morning, the compound was secure with no sight of the Taliban leader. It was thought that the leader had fled before the Americans could arrive, and that his most trusted fighters made a last-ditch effort to delay his pursuers long enough to give him time to escape. The theory was backed up by the fact that the 2 fighters who escaped the initial attack by the Apache gunship were joined throughout the firefight by more and more Taliban, making their group between 9 and 10 members by 2:15 in the morning. American commanders believed that Tahir was among these fighters and that the action needed to be taken immediately to prevent his escape. It was then decided to send in the SEALs. During the firefight with the Taliban at the compound, American planners assumed that the Taliban commander would be alerted to their presence and make his escape. That's why at 0100, local preparations were already underway to insert the Immediate Reaction Force, or IRF, that comprised the SEALs and their supporting members. The landing zone that was picked out was thoroughly studied before and was previously approved for earlier missions, but never utilized. The pilots that flew the aircraft were also extremely experienced, with thousands of hours of flight time, including hundreds of hours of combat experience. The helo was also blacked out, meaning absolutely no light emissions were allowed from the aircraft, which could give an easy target for any Taliban gunners below. The one precaution that was the most sound was also the most controversial. The 2 CH-47T Chinook helicopters used to insert the Ranger platoon earlier were also utilized for the SEAL insertion, but instead of splitting the men between the 2 aircraft, they were combined onto one. That would prove a fatal mistake. Why it was decided to put the entire IRF team in one helo was actually a matter of sound operating principles utilized throughout the war, and especially in this area. Multiple helicopters would present multiple targets to the Taliban, especially in the most vulnerable landing and takeoff phases, when the helos would be unable to utilize their missile defense measures or maneuver to safety. Safety concerns may sound extreme, but this threat was not some figment of the imagination. Over the past several months, there have been at least 4 attempted downings of helicopters by Taliban fighters using rocket-propelled grenades and other small arms. Though wildly inaccurate and basic, these weapons were still a force to be reckoned with in the hands of the right user and with the law. This fate would happen far beyond the Taliban side. As Extortion 17 made its way over the treetops and slowed its speed to about 50 knots or almost 60 miles per hour, while also dropping to between 100 and 150 feet, the helo made its approach from the northwest. It was trying to touch down near some fields as it had to pass over several pallets or mud buildings on the way down. It was here that the Taliban fired between 2 or 3 rocket-propelled grenades at the aircraft. The first one missed, but at least one other hit its mark. The warhead exploded near the end of the aft rotor blade, taking off over 10 feet of blade. This in turn caused a simultaneous catastrophic failure of the aircraft's integrity, which quickly brought it down in a matter of seconds. In the mangled wreckage of the once mighty Chinook, there were no survivors. Immediately after the downing, the circling Chinook helicopter radioed that they could see the other aircraft burning and needed help. The Rangers quickly broke from the compound and rushed over to the wreckage. Once on the scene, they immediately set up a perimeter to prevent the Taliban from swooping in to finish off their comrades, and they started searching for survivors. Unfortunately, by the end of the morning, the search for survivors was complete, and all 38 on board were confirmed killed. An Army ground convoy was dispatched to transport the remains, and additional Special Forces units were called in to help sort out the wreckage. Once all the remains were loaded onto the convoy, recovery efforts began in earnest. What the Army wanted to know from the wreckage was why one of their most combat-tested aircraft suddenly and without warning plummeted from the sky. Had it been a freak accident? Was it a mechanical failure of the aircraft? Had the Taliban acquired some new advanced weapon systems capable of downing aircraft with ease? The answers to these questions and many more were sought not only by the Army, but by the families of the deceased, Central Command leadership, and the U.S. Congress. Initial reports from the Taliban stated that the weapon that brought down the helicopter was a standard RPG commonly utilized throughout the country, while some locals speculated that the Taliban had in fact acquired a new weapon from Pakistan. These reports were unsubstantiated and not backed up by the investigation conducted by the Army. The Army wanted to know how such a weapon, with a max effective range of a little over several hundred yards, could take down an aircraft with only one shot. To prove this conclusively, the Army fired a similar weapon system at the exact same blades and was able to replicate the damage perfectly, thereby concluding that without a doubt, an RPG could in fact cause such catastrophic damage. But what of the Taliban fighter who fired that 1 in a million shot? Apparently, after the battle, American forces intercepted radio communications from him bragging about what he had done. However, the celebration was short-lived. Several days later, he and the Taliban leader, who was the focus of the failed raid, were cornered and killed in an airstrike. A follow-on team confirmed their deaths after the fact. Extortion 17 was brought down by a lucky 1 in a million shot, and sadly, over 3 dozen of the U.S. and Afghan military
ideas?
So this mission I'm about to tell you about is one of the craziest missions that I've ever been on.
Sid's been thinking about getting dentures for a while. Well, picture this. At Aspen Dental, you can get dentures.
They came out and took our place, and my troop moved into Jonas's troop's location. We slept in their beds. We packed up their things. Walked through their tents with what felt like their lingering ghosts. I mean, it was the eeriest thing, man. Half-drank cups of coffee sitting on a desk. Derek Benson's tie shorts on the floor where it looks like he probably just changed out to his op kit. I saw on Matt Mason's desk a letter from his wife, Jessica, printed on a sonogram of their unborn baby and a note from her to him.
Let's move on to extortion.
Yeah,
Biggest loss in SEAL team history still to this day.
yeah. Very strange that prior to that Red Wings was, and somehow I was directly involved with both. Yeah, that was a tough one, man. It was, what some people don't realize, I think, is that it was a troop. It was the largest loss of life, but it was a third of our entire command. And that's a massive chunk of personality to just be gone like that in an instant. I was up in one of our fobs at the time, and we got the word, we were all hanging out, and we got the word, hey, something happened, one of the birds went down, and that's not that uncommon, but usually it's one of those, like, there was malfunction, they crash landed, there's a couple broken bones maybe, but, you know, like, all right, let's not overreact, these things happen. I think we've become numb to that, just repetitive. These birds were just very reliable, and the pilots are exceptional, so we're gonna be fine. That was the initial feeling I had. I was like, all right, let's see what happened. So I remember going in the jog and standing there, and we hadn't heard anything on the radio. And I was waiting to hear Jonas's voice come over the radio. Jonas Kelsaw, a good friend of mine, and he didn't come on the radio. Minute goes by. I'm watching the ISR footage. You've seen it, people have seen it from the movies, but we're looking at this black heat spot. And normally, you can see the fuselage, you can see the outline of the helo sitting there. And so they're just looking at this black heat spot. And I was like, hey man, can you zoom out? Like, what are you doing? So zoomed in on this one heat spot. Like, God, there's a fire somewhere in the crash site. But like, zoom out and show me the fuselage. Like, let's figure out what we're looking at here. And then the guy just looked up at me and said, that's the fuselage. That's the helo. And it was nothing but a heat spot. And it is in that moment I knew, okay, we lost the entire bird. And then I'm thinking, okay, so I said, hey, will you print the manifest for the bird? Normally we split up into different helos. Normally, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I said, print out the manifest, I want to understand which half of the troop it was. And they printed out and handed it to me, and I'm going down the list, and I said, no, this is the troop roster. I need the manifest. You made a mistake. And the guy said, no, sir, that's the manifest. That was who was on the bird. And in that moment, I knew, oh my God, it's everybody. It's everybody. And so I ran quickly. Everyone else was making decisions. I wasn't in the decision-making capability here. Other people were solving these problems. We were just observing on standby. And so I ran to the phone and I called my wife and I said, hey, I need you to hear my voice. I can't tell you what happened, but I need you to hear my voice. And I could hear the quiver in hers, and she said, well, how bad is it? And I said, it's worse than Danny. I said, I need you to watch the news, and the minute this thing breaks, you'll know it. And I need you to call my mom and tell her I'm okay. She said, okay. And then we began to figure out what to do next and how to process that, which I don't even know if we ever will. There's no real way to wrap your head around that kind of a loss. But you try, and you have the team. And we're all in solidarity as the team to suffer through this together, and so we did our best to do that. Here's what I'd offer. Concepts that I couldn't wrap my head around until this. 31 Americans and 7 Afghans, 31 including the dog. FaceTiming with my wife as we're trying to figure out what to do. And no one knew how to process this. The command didn't know what to do. There's no plan for this kind of thing. There was even talk of, we bring these guys home. What do we do here? This is unprecedented. Are they even in an emotionally healthy enough state to stay in the fight? We always talk about staying in the fight. We're never out of the fight. Is that even possible with the gravity of this situation? And we're all wrestling with that. Of course, none of us wanted to go home. We knew we had to stay for our future, for our sanity. We had to stay. We had to see to the end. We had to fulfill our duty. I'm on a FaceTime call or whatever Skype it was at the time with my wife. And I'll never forget, I'm trying to articulate that need, understanding maybe a glimpse of the pain she's enduring. And she just looked at me and said, you stay and you do what you need to do. You finish the task at hand. And then you come home to me. And I'll be forever grateful for that. Because then she went to every single funeral and memorial service while we stayed forward to continue the fight. She endured that. At one point, my daughter, who was really, really young at the time, we try to shield our kids from these horrors. Everyone does, but at some point they know something's up. And when our babysitter became a live-in nanny, because my wife said another funeral in another black dress with mascara running again, my daughter asked her, Mommy, what's going on? These were just meetings. I think she was 8 at the time, maybe. And my wife said, well, sweetheart, you know how Daddy and his friends go on helicopters as part of their job. Well, one of those helicopters had a crash, and so Daddy's friends got hurt. And her first question was Mr. Jonas on board? Because Jonas had previously volunteered to come out and take my place on a deployment so I could come home for that daughter's surgery. So Jonas was very close to our family. And my wife had to say, yes, sweetie, he was. And she said, are they going to be okay? And my wife answered it like only a warfighter spouse can. She said, no, sweetheart, their boo-boos were so bad they had to go to heaven to get fixed. I can't imagine a more perfect way to frame it for an 8-year-old's mind. So Amy kept going to the funerals, and I stayed on deployment, and DJ and his boys came out to help. So there's the DJ, small circle again. They came out and took our place at my troop, moved into Jonas' troop's location, and we slept in their beds. We packed up their things, walked through their tents with what felt like their lingering ghosts. I mean, it was the eeriest thing, man. Half-drink cups of coffee sitting on a desk. Derek Benson's tie shorts on the floor where it looks like he'd probably just changed out to his op kit. I saw on Matt Mason's desk a letter from his wife, Jessica, printed on a sonogram of their unborn baby and a note from her to him. It was just these remnants of life that felt like they were still there, and it felt like they could walk in the door at any moment. But you knew they couldn't and they wouldn't. And trying to reconcile those things in your brain was almost an impossibility. It was. I mean, it was. And I think that was part of the beginnings of those emotions getting bottled and put away, which would later become rage. But we did the best we can. Did the ramp ceremony. 2 C-17s. That blew my mind. 2 C-17s. And we sent them home, and then we got back to work, and this comes back to everything I was talking about earlier about becoming a monster and choosing not to do monstrous things. This was one of the most difficult leadership challenges I've ever faced, because we wanted revenge. We wanted to get after it. There was such rage and anger about the loss, knowing that we all signed up for this. This is part of the deal. How do you lead that when you see it yourself? I'd offer, brutally honest, there was bloodlust. We wanted to get after it. So we very much looked at ourselves and realized, hey, we're not careful, we will become the very monsters that we're here fighting. And if we become the monsters that we're here fighting, then what are we doing other than contributing to chaos? And if that's the case, then there's nothing virtuous about this anymore. And then that defeats the entire point behind everything we're supposed to be doing and everything we're supposed to stand for as Americans. And so we were very deliberate as a troop about bringing in people to help us process these things and say, hey, help us understand our anger and our rage. Help us understand how to harness that on the battlefield. How to keep that monster bridled and not do the wrong things. Not give in to vengeance, instead look for retribution. And we did it. And all eyes were on us. And we did it. And it felt so good. It was incredibly difficult. Because you were bridling something that you almost didn't want to bridle, but wanted to let it off the leash. There was a very strong desire to do it, but we held ourselves in check. And we executed those ops with such precision and stayed within the ethical boundaries of warfare. I've never been more proud of dudes than I was of what we did following that catastrophic loss. Man, that's heavy. That is heavy. It was a rough season, man. And then that wasn't even the beginning. The harder part was coming home. It was so unhealthy. And it's hard to describe without being embarrassed, because I look back at how hard my heart had become and cruel I'd become. I mentioned the things my wife endured. I mean, she's a fighter. She's a fighter. I went in the clock, when we were buds, going into Hell Week, she's giving me a kiss before going to Hell Week goodbye, and she said, if you quit, don't come home to me. I don't want to quit her for a husband. This is the woman that endured these things for our nation. And I come home to her, and I found myself having conversations with her and my mom and my dad and my family and my friends, and they'd ask questions. And I found myself getting angry at their questions and not even wanting to share with them, because in my mind I thought, you haven't earned the right for me to be vulnerable enough to share my grief with you, because you weren't downrange with me, because you didn't endure what I did, because you didn't move into their tents and sleep in their beds with their ghosts. So I will withhold that from you. Why, I don't know. A coping mechanism. Back to where those emotions go. Incredibly unhealthy. I mean, it was destroying me. Anger, I've heard it said, is like taking a poison pill and expecting it to hurt somebody else. It was destroying me from the inside. And thereby destroying my relationships. My relationship with my wife and my kids. I mean, I already mentioned I wasn't home much already, and now you add to that when I am home, I'm angry at her for asking questions. If anyone's earned the right to ask those questions and have those conversations, it was her. But I was isolating myself and ostracizing her in that process, and it took someone intervening. It took someone who saw something and had the courage to say it, and I'll never forget the moment I was home from deployment and I'm wrestling with all these things, and he said, "Hey man, you have a rage problem you need to deal with." And I was very good at not showing it. So good that Amy's father was in the room, and he said, Brad's not an angry person. I think you misread him. And he said, no, I didn't say anger. He said, this is so far past anger. Brad has a rage problem, and it's wrath, and it's going to tear you up, and you need to figure out how to deal with it, or it's going to ruin you.
Who is this?
It was a close family friend of ours. Yeah, he was a doctor, actually. He's a doctor, and he was. We were there for an appointment with my wife, and as she's doing this appointment, he's very in tune to emotions, and he kind of looked over at me. He's like, "Hey, you mind if I take a look at you and ask a couple questions?" Whatever, bro. So he does, and he nailed it within 5 minutes. He just stripped the fear right off me, and it was really shortly after that I realized I was not doing everything as well as I'd convinced myself I was, and I was straying from who I wanted to be.
No matter where you're watching Sean Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.
get after it. There was such rage.
And subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.
Yes, this is it.
We're on.
We're doing another history podcast. This time we've got the Colin Quinn. Yes. And today's topic is Vietnam. What a time.
Yeah. What a crazy time. I mean, in some ways, I feel like it's the most important. It changed everything. Plus, it was at that time, you know?
Yeah.
But it changed. I always feel like these things have, like, bigger, like, what comes first? Vietnam makes people, was it a revolution where everybody's like, we're fighting against the system, or was Vietnam the thing that made it go? And it's to put it in context.